Hello everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad you could join me for my very first interview. I'm going to be interviewing Professor Rick Mehta. Professor Mehta ran into a bit of controversy at the beginning of this year after a tweet he sent out to Conservative Leader Andrew Scheer. And I reached out to him, he was kind enough to join me here today, and he is officially the first guest on the Just My Stupid Opinion podcast. I couldn't be happier, could not have asked for a better first guest.
I'll see if I can still get a visual on you, like get my webcam going.
Skype is great when it works.
Yes, it is.
No, I mean, you get what you pay for, right? So I'm not going to complain.
Oh, do you see me now?
Yeah.
Fantastic. How are you doing today?
A little exhausted, but otherwise okay.
I can imagine. I want to thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I just want to start off by saying I took a quick scroll through your Facebook today, and I love how much Batman was on there.
Oh, yeah, I'm a big fan of the Dark Knight trilogy.
Excellent. I approve. So I was thinking, why don't you start off by telling everybody what ended up happening since the new year?
Well, yeah, it started, I guess, this last Monday when I was informed that a trans activist based out of Halifax had said that I was transphobic. So that was on the Monday. Then after that, a whole storm ensued over a tweet I'd sent to the opposition leader, just saying that, you know, on the one hand, you claim to be in favor of free speech, but on the other hand, you're canning Senator Beyak from your race relation, from the Conservative caucus, and that what he was doing then was, in essence, saying that you could not criticize, you know, one group of people, in this case, the Aboriginal, and that ultimately is bad for race relations. What I was trying to just imply is that, yeah, we should all be having on the same rules. You can't have anyone who's having a protected status.
So essentially have us all on equal footing, and then we can actually speak to each other as, well, people.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow, and yeah, I ended up seeing that. At first I saw the news articles that ended up coming out, and, you know, they kind of painted you as, you know, as a bigot or a racist. And then I checked out the tweet. When I checked out the tweet myself, I was surprised because you were just calling them out for a double standard, especially considering how freedom of speech is really something that a lot of people are not taking it seriously these days. And unfortunately, a lot of that is coming from my generation, the millennials. A lot of them are just stomping all over freedom of speech as if it means nothing.
Yeah, they don't. I guess they don't understand. And yeah, I don't know if I really helped myself because I talked about it last Monday in class. And then on Wednesday I did, because in the context of the class I was talking about intelligence, and kind of like before I talked about the history of in which, you know, some of the older tests had been developed, how those were biased. And so then I was trying to go into the modern context, but I think I went a little bit overkill on that. So that, I guess we all make mistakes at some point, but I'm hoping that's one that I can bounce back from. But yeah, I'll continue the course from there. But it was strange, though, with the range of responses, because I know one student who went to the dean to complain about it. But then on the other hand, I had a student email me to say, thank you, it's about time someone said something about the foolishness going on campus. And she said, you know, I feel like I can't speak in my classes because if I do, I get shot down by my peers and my professor for having a viewpoint that doesn't go with the orthodoxy.
Well, I myself am at Algonquin College for construction engineering, so I'm more in the trades area, but I'm even starting to see how it's starting to seep in there. They're starting to focus more on, more about gender parity in there. So I believe they're starting to offer more opportunities for the women to get in, but I feel like if they're interested in it, they should go into it on their own. Also, just a way a couple of my teachers have spoken about it. I have a couple female teachers, and it seems the way they have there seems to be some political correctness there about, you know, the industry itself. So I'm starting to see how even in places such as the trades, it's starting to seep into it. So it's really seems to be becoming a problem these days. What do you think we can do about it? Like, how can we reverse the tide, I guess?
yeah, I guess start to get people talking. So I know there are people on campus, let's say amongst faculty, who might agree with me or support me, but they're self-censoring, so that doesn't help. So that allows the ones who want to exert control to have their own way. And ultimately, all they do is call you names at the end of the day because they don't have any arguments. So, but I guess others are just afraid of the name calling and the harassment.
I've also noticed that even when the name calling and the harassment isn't enough, I saw the tweet even myself that some people are even now are trying to do a call to action against you. There was one person I saw who was saying words are useless on you or something along those lines.
Well, I have tweeted a few times that every insult I receive is a badge of honor. So
I definitely see that.
So I take, so I just kind of, I just try to take their weapons away from them. So the downside of that, though, I wonder if there is that risk that they'll use real weapons. But yeah, because there was one person who had threatened to hit me with his grandmother's iron skillet. And I reported that, but nothing happened. And kind of get the Twitter report saying, oh, well, context matters.
Context matters. Meanwhile, there was just a big release over the last week about the way they treat people on the right, how they censor them compared to people on the left. So I find that a little funny that they're still taking the moral high ground on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there was with the person, the trans activist, I think on that person's Facebook page, there was some joking about being violent towards me. So that was a little bit disturbing because the first person I knew who did that was, I think, 4 or 5 hours away. So you don't take that too seriously. But Halifax is an hour from where I am, so that's a little bit more disturbing.
Yeah, that's getting a little closer to home.
Yeah.
As for myself, it was reasons that you're talking about right now, because just briefly about myself, I used to be farther down the left when I was after high school, and over the last few years I made a transition more back towards the center or a little bit more right wing. And it was one of these reasons because I was starting to see how, well, people would say things like, oh, we're liberals or we're leftists, we don't believe in violence, yet there were times where violence was justified against the right wing. I also started to see the hypocrisy where it's okay when we do it, but it's not okay when you do it. So these were one of the things that started to bring me back. And actually, I would credit Dr. Jordan Peterson as one of the people who really was gave me the final kick in the butt, if you want, to just start up my podcast, because I was seeing what was happening to him similar to what I'm seeing happening to you now. And this is why I wanted to talk to you about it, because you have a real inside understanding of what's going on. It's happening to you right now.
Yeah, so, it's a bit of an emotional roller coaster. I've just been grateful for all the supporters. And, because I think I got... thanks to all the recent events, I went from, I think, around the 400-ish range of supporters to like 1,200, 1,300, something like that. So it really just, spiked there in terms of getting my name out, and then having people sending emails of support to me. And even the Indigenous people saying, we had good experiences and we want our story told. So why is it that they only get theirs? But then, I heard from even a student on campus or an employee on campus, but because that person and his family come from a bad experience, they just could not overcome that and think that maybe there were other people who had a good experience. So it's a bit, I think it's a bit sad for both sides.
I would agree. Now, considering these Indigenous people that had good experiences at the residential schools, would you say it was actually a minority, a small group, or would you say there was actually a pretty decent number of Indigenous people that we're not hearing about that actually would say that their experience for them was good?
Well, I know Thompson Highway, I think he had reported, 7,000 people that had a good experience, if I remember that correctly. So there are definitely some groups who want to launch the counter narrative to what's happening. So, the main problem I have with the decolonization movement, and I try to voice concern about this at the university by email, is just that it's done under the guise that if you disagree in any way, you must somehow be in favor of atrocities that were done in the past. So that, of course, lends itself to people not speaking because no one wants to be labeled a racist. So when it's done under that framework, it's not really truly consultation. Then there's that growing trend that we have now of starting every event, or lots of events now at the universities, with these acknowledgements to unceded territories and whatnot. But it's all based on the wishes of activists who are on the committees in the first place. So it's not like they're genuine representatives of the community they claim to represent. So just on average, they tend to be better educated, well off, and living in the urban areas. So, like or with Acadia here, in a university setting. So they're generally in a far better position than the people they claim to represent. Because, without any data, you just don't know if the other members want that kind of attention called to them, when they're at any event like that, right? So you just don't know how they're interpreting. If they could say that, they could interpret it that you hear that, oh, we took your land, but we have no intention of giving it back. So if that's the case, and there's even a small minority that's interpreting it that way, then that means there's going to be resentment that's growing on their side, at least with a small subgroup. And then, of course, for the rest of us who had nothing to do with the atrocities in the past, all it's doing is saying, you're guilty for things that happened in the past, even though you had nothing to do with it. And so I don't see how that's supposed to in any way be working towards reconciliation. And I guess the fact that I've heard this even at Evergreen State College when watching some of the YouTube videos from what happened there prior to their uprising. So that tells me that's probably not something that came out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or it's highly unlikely, not having seen the report. But I don't know. So I think that's one issue. And then when we had our report that we used for our protocols and whatnot, it just says it's based on the TRC's Truth and Reconciliation Committee's recommendations, but it doesn't say what part comes from what recommendation. So it's really easy to abuse that. And I know there was that at the Toronto School Board that the one person said he wanted the word chief removed from everything at the school board, even though the word chief has nothing to do with being First Nations.
They wanted the word chief removed.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so instead of chief financial officer, something else, and he said it's because that's a derogatory towards the Indigenous people, but that term has nothing to do with, Indigenous. So it's been long used before, or used in a lot of different contexts before that, I believe.
Oh, wow. I didn't hear about that story. Although when you were speaking about this, it did bring me back to before Jagmeet Singh got elected to the NDP leadership, I was watching one of the debates that happened in Ottawa between all the leaders, and I remember one thing was that 3 out of the 4 that came out in the capital of our country recognize it as unceded land, which to me was, you might as well just have called it stolen land. And I found this very shocking that they were running for the head of a political party and were willing to call our capital some 200-300 years after colonization, maybe even more. They were willing to essentially call it stolen land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So ultimately, I don't know why it's there or how it's supposed to be productive, and there's no discussion on that. Because when I did email the dean with my concerns, and I'd actually ran that by 2 colleagues at other universities so they could make sure it was all worded nicely and be accurate and whatnot. And so I sent that to him, and I copied it to an email distribution list that people who are on faculty and staff are, they can be on that list. And so his comment was just dismissive of, you're being just grandstanding and you just have your own views of the world. I don't know where you got your arguments and articles from, but I'm with people who are, these good people, and they're the scholars who know their area. So I'll go with them over anything you have to say.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it gotten this bad inside the universities.
Oh, yeah, no, it is. It's really bad. And so there was that, and what else? So just, I guess, the dismissive attitude. Oh, yeah, that's the thing, too, because one of the critiques I had was that for the Indigenous, non-Indigenous relations, all of that is done through an office. So an office of the, for Aboriginal whatever. So it's an office specifically for the Aboriginal students and whatnot. But anything has to go through the central office if you want to do even any event or something like that. And so that seems rather draconian. And even though I mentioned that in the email message that I'd sent out, no one responded to that or said anything. So that's disheartening.
So in this sort of situation, is that the sort of the normal circumstance where you won't receive a response, or are you receiving more of an aggressive response from the university? Are they trying to cover it up, or are they just trying not to forget about it and not talk about it?
Well, a bit of both, I guess. I heard from a couple of people who were like, how dare you be against equity now, decolonization, that's horrible of you. So there's a couple private email messages like that. How dare you go against the grain, but nothing to refute any of the arguments that I had of why that would be a concern. Because one of the concerns I have is that with the actions that are being taken is that it's actually going to lead to worse race relations. So it's not going to be counterproductive to reconciliation if that's what the end goal is. And no one said a thing about that. And so then after the dean sent the message, a couple of people emailed me to say, wow, that response was so inappropriate, but then they wouldn't go and send an email message out themselves to the wider list to say anything. So that's so that's been a bit disheartening there. So I think one person commented and he kind of said this is a bit like communist Czechoslovakia, but then he offset that by saying, well, I don't want to go too far, that might be a bit overkill. So so on the one hand he was trying to help me, but then after that kind of backtracked within his own message.
So I was wondering, though, this circumstance, Jordan Peterson speaks a lot about postmodernism and cultural Marxism. Do you think that perhaps this situation you're going through you're dealing with this sort of thing? You're dealing with cultural Marxism, postmodernism? Oh, definitely. Yeah. Because the first time, and I didn't understand that, was at a union meeting. And so the discussion was on employment equity, what steps to do in terms of, putting the procedure to, include the variables like race and gender, et cetera. And so then I put up my hand and said, well, why don't we just use something like a blind hiring process? So then that way we just have a fair process that's neutral. It's fair to the candidates. We're not going to be biased one way or the other. So there's no conscious or any type of unconscious bias there one way. We can just look at the candidates that we need based on their merit. And then the conversation then just continued as if I hadn't spoken, and that was something bizarre that I'd never seen before. So that was my first so that was really strange. I'd never seen anything like that in my life. And that's it's like dismissive and demeaning to you, as if what you have to say has no merit, but you're actually trying to get a good point across. And we can look at all sorts of examples as to why why doing this sort of thing, race relations end up worse. I mean, I think pointing to the states right now and race relations between the states would show how playing identity politics and favoritism is actually a bad idea, and it can lead to bigger gaps between races. Oh, definitely, yeah. So it just seems rather obvious. But so I don't know how to get around that. So far I'm the only one speaking out, and hopefully others will join me. But so to people who send me emails, I would tell them, basically what I need is some form of public support, because I think that's the only way. And maybe if there's the current crop of students, if any of them start to speak up. Okay, so you would say it's more amongst, it would be more amongst the students to be able to speak up and make these changes then, eh? Well, I mean, if any of them decides to, it's up to them. It's their country, their future. Unfortunately, we seem to not be doing a good job with forging our future. At least my generation, I mean the millennials. Yeah, so I'm not sure why they would put such a low value on that, just the ability to express yourself. One thing I've wondered, it might be completely off topic, but I've almost wondered if with the increase, like how fast technology has gone and everything's become disposable, I wonder if this has seeped in some way into the way begin to treat each other. Now we kind of treat each other as if we're we're disposable when broken?
Possible. I mean, the technology it worked, it got released and people started using it without doing any form of thinking first. And that happened at a mass level, like, on a global scale. And so, yeah, I don't know.
While I was looking into you, I found 2 quotes by you that I really liked, and I find that they might go together. We can use them together for my next question. Is the first one, which was made recently as this controversy happened, which you says, "My job is to teach the students how to think, not what to think." And also another one which was made in a lecture that was posted on YouTube, I think back in September. You said the underlying assumption is that any topic, regardless of controversy, can be discussed, scrutinized, and debated in an academic setting. I was curious, at what point do you think this changed, when we can no longer discuss these ideas and when it became so wrong to essentially think for yourself?
Yeah, I'm not sure when I noticed the transition point, but it probably, I think it was around 2015 that I started noticing strange things happening on campuses. So there was, I guess, of course, it started with Yale, that uprising there. So that's when it first came on my radar. But I think that was years of people protesting on campuses when they didn't like the speaker who was there. So that has been going on for years, but it never escalated to this level. And so that seemed to come out of, I think, at least from my perspective, it seemed to come out of nowhere in 2015. And then it kept growing instead of getting smaller. And then it was during the Jordan Peterson, when he was starting to get vocal, that I started noticing some disconnect. So just that, I'm in a psychology department, of course, and he's in a psychology department too, but there's no one at the psychology department talking about something that was that major happening. And that struck me as strange.
I think it shows how deep-rooted this sort of problem is at the moment. But if you don't mind, if we go back to talking about the Senator Beyak situation, I was curious on how do you feel that Andrew Scheer should have handled this situation? Because the one thing that I wrestle when I think about this more politically is I think that this was damage control by Scheer, because this would be used against him in the House of Commons if he kept Senator Beyak on the Conservative caucus.
I don't know, because ultimately, the people who would have offended or whatnot are not ones who would have voted for him in the first place. So I'm not sure if that's the case, then you're going on the basis of the stereotype and whatnot. So if that was the case, then I'm not sure if that was an issue, or if he'd been better off to just ride out the storm, or just say the truth, which is that what happened to those letters is that you're conflating race and culture. So what you're critiquing are the cultures of what's happening, of the groups of people, and it's not being based on race. So that's, I think, what's happened is that when you do cross-cultural studies, so comparing, Japanese, Canadian to Japanese to Chinese or whatever, there is considered a cross-cultural study. But then within the context within Canada or in the States, if you talk then about different groups, then it's assumed to be by race and not about culture. So for some reason, we've kind of conflated the two, or like one is used to sort of override the other.
The one thing I was also wondering is, do you think that we might be seeing under Scheer a more politically correct Conservative Party? Because I remember some months back, on top of this that you're talking about with him removing Senator Beyak and not holding up to free speech, he also, a while back, I remember, maybe it was because he was under pressure, but he also sort of admitted to the press, he said, I'm a feminist. And first off, I have nothing against feminists at all, but I felt like he was sort of going along with the Trudeau, I'm a feminist type talking point. So I was wondering if you think if perhaps maybe we're seeing a more politically correct Conservative Party.
Oh yeah, well, I think it actually started with Rona Ambrose. So just her way, I think, of trying to get votes, by saying that judges just need more sexual assault training and going on sort of that bandwagon and not kind of think, how can we just make the system fair so that way it treats people who come forward in a fair manner, as well as the people who are going to be accused. So it's just based on that premise. If someone comes forward, then the other person must be guilty, and how can we arrange our system so that there's automatic guilt? So it started, I think, with the Ambrose era, and it's just continued with Andrew Scheer.
Oh, I didn't even think about Rona Ambrose in that situation. I admit it was before I started paying attention more to politics, because I wasn't doing my podcast at the time. I kind of started in just before Andrew Scheer got in.
Yeah, so I think, so it's happened since then. So I think in Ontario with the Patrick Brown Conservatives, they're just, just liberals under a different, with different clothings. So I'm not sure if there's that much of a difference then between the Patrick Brown Conservatives and the Wynne Liberals.
Well, considering how I'm in Ontario, that is very concerning to me. No, I've noticed that Canada's been making a big shift towards the left these days. Do you know what might be the cause of that?
I think it might be global. It seems to be, or at least in quite a few countries. I mean, the States. Well, I wonder what the States. Well, at least there, the Conservatives have tried to. There they come in all their variations. So unfortunately, I guess a subset are the ones who get all the publicity, as opposed to the more reasonable Conservatives that you just don't hear from, at least not in the mainstream press. But in Europe, I think for sure, I would believe that. I'm not sure why that is in terms, and why there's not much for opposition or on that front.
And the one thing I've feared is if we're seeing this shift to the left and we're not seeing much of the right represented, we're seeing a rise in the far right groups in America, and I'm starting to see them as well here. There's been a few smaller protests that have gone on over 2017. So I fear that as we've made the shift more to the left and we're being more biased to left-wing politics, that we're actually seeing these fringe groups grow and are willing to take more drastic action in order to get their message heard or get their cause, whatever, to reach their cause.
Yeah, no, definitely there's the polarization that we see in the States is seeming to happen here now in Canada, and that's definitely disturbing because, come to your next election, it's, what do you want, left-wing fascism or left-wing communism or, right-wing fascism, and both are equally unappealing. So I don't know how, once we get to that stage,
It seems that a lot of people have forgotten the history of what happens under communism. And I'll admit my ignorance to that in the past, that I was never a communist or anything. But, at times I kind of looked at it like, well, it's equality. We're all equal. What's the big deal? And then people are saying, well, look at the body count behind it. And I remember my answer being, what body count? I had no idea that there were these millions and millions of murders that happened under communism. But I don't understand why people don't realize this.
It just never was. It was never really taught in the schools. I don't remember that in my school system, like during my high school or anything like that. So, yes, for whatever reason, it was never covered, and so I think it was considered kind of cool to be part of your counterculture if you had your Che Guevara shirts or whatnot. So it's kind of considered a trendy thing to have these, the posters of these mass murderers on your body or as posters on your wall.
And I guess this can kind of bring us full circle back to the beginning, because I come from the public school system. So when I started looking more into Senator Beyak, I was actually surprised when I started seeing more examples of Indigenous people that enjoyed their time in residential schools, because as far as I know, it was everything from the 6,000 children that died under the schools to how we destroyed an entire culture to how we kidnapped their children. But then it actually shocked me a little bit when I saw that there was actually a big number of Indigenous people that enjoyed their time there.
Yeah, because they said that, they had the company of other students. They got skills that they needed. I think for some, it was their opportunity to actually have 3, square meals a day that they couldn't get at home. So, so there were those aspects to it. What else? There was... Yeah, so one lady called me, and she had worked in the residential school system, and she said, when there was a case of abuse, the principal reported to the RCMP, and it was investigated, and that teacher was taken away, was gone. And she also mentioned that it was started actually by a chief in Sault Ste. Marie, so he wanted something better for his people, and so that's why he actually negotiated to start the residential schools. And that part doesn't seem to be part of the narrative at all. And she said, if you look at the $10 bill and look at the individuals on them, so one of them actually was from the residential school system. And so, of course, he's there on a $10 bill as someone who was from that system and was successful and happy. And that part does not seem to be part of the discussion at all. I mean, I didn't know about it until she called, and I have to fact check that for myself.
Well, another thing I came across while I was looking into the Senator Beyak situation, I went into the comments of an iPolitic article, and when I got into in the article, someone was telling me to go read something that was called the Indian Agent and Residential School Act of Canada, 1946 to 1970. And I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I came across a passage, and I believe it was page 62. I'll just read it real quick for you. It said, "For many superintendents, too many difficult issues associated with the transition away from residential schooling was an unexpected continued high demand for it by the Indian parents themselves and the opposition of it by the churches. Regarding Indian parents, several superintendents noted by the mid-1950s one of the main problems they faced was trying to dissuade Indian parents from requesting that their children be sent to residential schools."
Wow. I did not know that at all.
Yeah, I can send you the link after our conversation if you like.
Sure. That'd be great.
Okay, I'll do that for you. That shocked me too.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what's happening and why there's the push, and so I guess I just don't understand what's happening. So that's
the one
thing. And just the silence from everyone else. That's what I think is also a bit disturbing.
Sorry, I just had something and then I lost it.
But fair enough.
But I've also noticed that in your case, that after you got into everybody started coming back at you for your tweet, it seemed that you actually decided that you were going to flex your freedom of speech more, that you were emboldened to actually speak your mind more online.
Yeah, I guess it did the opposite. So I just kind of learned to take the insults as bad as an honor, because so obviously, you kind of put your thought out there, and then the response is not in line with what with the original tweet in the first place, because there's no reason why, if I see a tweet that I disagree with, I just ignore it. I can't be bothered to waste my time to respond to something if I find it offensive or if I disagree with it. So, but the fact that many people came at me, including even Cindy Blackstock.
Cindy Blackstock came at you?
Yeah, even she said, she came at, and said, can you cite some specific sources? And so I cited, Francis Widdowson, I think, or something along those lines. But eventually, we're having a conversation that was going nowhere. And so then I said, I'm getting really annoyed with you, and so I'm just going to mute you now. And I think that shocked, a lot of her supporters. I don't think they're used to having someone talk to her like that. And so I think that increased it temporarily because of that, because how dare you be rude to her? But ultimately, I think it showed I don't fear anyone.
Well, respect is a two-way street, so if she showed you respect, you would have a friendly conversation to her.
Yeah, and it was a bit strange because in my talk on free speech, I said one of the problems with the Trudeau government was their relationship with the First Nations, and I said, why is it that on our campus, we were so super active during the Harper years, but then as soon as the Trudeau years started, then we have, all of that happened up north, at Thunder Bay with the lack of drinking water and not a single person on campus to support her. yeah, so it seemed odd then because that she would be coming at me because actually in my talk I was trying to be supportive of her, thinking that she was just trying to get them drinking water. So I do wonder if there's corruption there as well, because I know some of the Aboriginal people who contacted me said, that there was corruption in the Assembly of First Nations, so at that level, and that they're getting pressure to stay silent from the Trudeau and Wynne-led governments.
So the people who champion as their heroes are really the ones stifling them, then?
Yeah. So it's it's a bizarre situation.
Yeah, I've I would say the Trudeau coming into power was the other thing that sort of pushed me more towards the right wing. When he first came in, I didn't vote for him. I voted for Tom Mulcair, but I said, let's see what he can do. And very soon after, I regretted saying that. And for one of these reasons is the fact that he's been for a person who promised the most transparent government in Canadian history, he deflects every single question he's ever asked.
Yeah. So, in the last election, if it wasn't for the fact that I believe in the principle of voting, because that's how you work in a democracy, if it wasn't for that, I would have not voted in that election. So, because I didn't care for Harper at the time. I think he just had gotten too much power and was too, had let it get it to his head, because where he wasn't talking to the press and the set kinds of campaign, the way he ran his campaign by vetting people who came in, that kind of thing. So I wasn't going to vote for him on that principle. And then, with Mulcair, the fact that in our writing, what someone had posted, so just as part of a Facebook discussion, the guy said, well, you just, for the sake of argument, we could say this, and it was something against Israel. And so then, because the Harper Conservatives had outed some of the NDP based on their post, so instead of supporting him, he just said no and got another candidate in his place. So that made me decide not to go with the NDP candidate in my region. I really did not like the Liberal either, who was there. He's just one who's been there too long and I think needs to go. So then I just went with what was next, which was Green, but not. I'll give credit that Elizabeth May was articulate and she seemed to know her stuff during her debates, but the candidate was not one that I particularly was keen on one way or the other. But I just thought better to vote for someone you don't like than to not vote at all.
Fair enough. I used to be on the opposite mindset. I was one of those persons that said, what's the point of voting? But as I got a little more politically involved and started looking into it, I really realized that it really does make a difference, especially with us, with our little ridings. We might not be able to make a difference necessarily on the country on a whole, but we can make a small difference in our communities with the ridings that we have.
Yeah.
Well, I only have a couple more questions for you, Professor, and I was wondering, after what happened with Jordan Peterson, he started getting more involved with YouTube's putting out lectures, and they were a big hit. And I was curious if perhaps in the future we may see something similar from you, if you get a little more active, speaking to the camera, telling people your knowledge.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I have to contribute. So, the talk I did on free speech, so that I'm really proud of. And so I remember after that was done, a group in the States called the Students for Free Expression. So there, the head of it, his name is Matthew Foldy, Foldi. And so I sent him the YouTube link, and then he said after he watched it, he just thought it was great. And so when he posted it on their Facebook page, it had the title, probably one of the best articulated arguments for free speech that we've seen in quite a while. So that was an ultimate compliment, that in terms of the respectability of the talk. Because he's what makes him interesting is that he's a Republican, but he's trying to work with the Democrats on campus to try to, restore civil discourse, to try to make things a little bit more manageable and sane, and so that people actually can talk to each other. So that was. So that made me feel good about that. But unfortunately, yeah, I guess it being an hour and 45 minutes long, no one wants to really listen to that. But I don't know how they do that with the Jordan Peterson videos, because with me, I find it's always a bit overwhelming seeing all these talks, and they're all, so long, whereas I just want to hear like a 10, 15-minute clip, and you don't get that. And I don't know how he can go on for 2 hours straight like that.
Even I can't do it. I can go on for a while on my podcast, but 2-3 hours are too long for me as well.
Yeah, I don't know how he does it without his mouth getting dry, or... Well, he does have water bottles, but they're on his stage and whatnot. But yeah, I don't know how he can talk about a different thing, and it's all just in his head without notes or slides or anything like that.
Oh, I couldn't even do this interview without at least a couple notes sitting in front of me. Otherwise, I would have forgotten all my questions, so I feel you on that one. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining me today, Professor.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. So... yeah, I definitely would be happy to do this again at some point. Just a matter of, because I don't know how you decide who to interview, and I don't know what your listenership is composed of, or any of those things.
You are actually my first interview.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, maybe I should have. Maybe I should have said that off the start. You are actually my very first one.
Oh, wow. Okay, wow. Okay, I'm just deeply honored. So,
well,
just the publicity, or I guess like the number of interviews that came. So the only one that was hostile was Evan Solomon. So that was one which I didn't expect, because when he asked a question, and this was a phone interview, I thought I'd have a few minutes to explain my answer, and it was just like I start to say something and then cut off to something, then he would be just with another question after that, and I answered his statement, and he said, well, I have no idea what that means, and then just moved on to something else. So that was the strangest interview I think I did on the phone, but the others have been friendly. In terms of the reports that are on the internet, I think the one that was the most fair was the one by Global News, so Brett Bundale and her articles. So of all the different ones, I think hers was the one that was the most reasonable. So the first one with the Chronicle Herald, what happened was it was the front page, and it says, Acadia Prof endorses Senator Beyak's statements, and I didn't. All I did was defend her right to post letters that she had received and to voice her opinion, whatever it happened to be. So I wasn't endorsing it one way or the other.
And this isn't my quote. This is actually a quote by a guy I watch on YouTube. But I find that it's better to let someone speak and let them hang themselves with their own words.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Or if someone speaks, you can have a conversation at some point, whereas if they don't, then... yeah, there's, then feelings or statements or whatever is on your mind, it's never discussed, and so that's the best way to harbor resentment. So I mean, even I was telling, when I was talking to CBC Indigenous, that, even if it's a white supremacist, better let them speak, because you don't know why they're white supremacists. Maybe they honestly believe it, or they're just raised that way, but they don't know why it is. And so if you can have a conversation, chances are maybe when they get to know you, they might start to question their beliefs and change. So, we're all humans, and if you don't know, give them the benefit of the doubt, and maybe they might come around.
And in my experience, the best way to de-escalate is through conversation as well. Like, even just in personal situations, if somebody happens to be mad at you, best way to do it is conversation.
Yeah, so I don't know. I just don't understand the current movement, and how it's gaining ground, or why. So it's just strange. So I'm just hoping, though, that this is the year that people have had enough, and that they can push back in a way that's constructive.
I hope so as well, Professor. So. Thank you again. I really appreciate you coming on to speak with me.
Okay, yeah, my pleasure. All right, have a good night.
You as well. Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye.
Well, there you have it, everybody. I want to thank Dr. Rick Mehta again for coming on to my podcast and being my first ever interview. And as you can all see, he's no radical. He's not preaching any dangerous ideas. He's just a man trying to stand up for free speech and free expression, who's trying to call out a double standard inside the Conservative Party of Canada. Instead, he was attacked for belief systems that he did not hold. And it should be clear by now from this interview. So I'm hoping that this interview will help clear Dr. Mehta from any of the slanderous allegations that are going up against him now, and hopefully in the future this interview will help him avoid any slanderous allegations then. I hope you all enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments section below, and once again I want to thank Professor Rick Mehta for joining me, and I wish him luck in his adventure ahead. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. I'm Adrian Lloyd. This is Just My Stupid Opinion. I'll see you soon.